Peace to the planet Earth. You know what it is?
Peace,
Worldwide, West
peace.
Side. You know what I'm saying? Bishop Chronicles, I have a special guest here. Dr. Tanji Gilliam is here to talk about a lot of stuff that deals with like women and hip hop and all the stuff that you talk about in the car, but you don't actually talk about. You know what I'm saying? So, welcome, Dr. Tanji
Thank
Gilliam.
you.
How are you doing
Thank you
today?
so much. I'm pumped. I'm pumped. We haven't been able to just link in so long.
I
And it
know,
just
in hella
feels
years.
so
You know what I
good
was
to
tripping
come
off?
back together. Pumped.
When did we meet? Did we meet at Harvard?
No, we met for the first time in your hood. And I
When
was
you
thinking,
came out here because of Dr.
yeah,
Peterson.
I think so. I think he's the one
Yeah.
who told me about you and was just kind of
Yeah.
like, look, if you're trying to do West Coast and you want, to link with some folks. When we were in LA, I linked up with the poetess at the radio station downtown.
That's my homegirl. Shout out to the poetess.
I know. She's so dope. And then when
Yeah.
I got up to you guys, I linked with Boots Riley downtown
Yeah.
Oakland. Yeah, and then we
It's so
got
cool.
on your, is it the BART? It's the BART, right? Where you are?
Yeah, BART train.
We
Yeah.
got on the BART and we
Came
came
down to
out to
Fremont.
where you are, Fremont, and
Yeah,
had a
we
great
recorded
time. So
over
that
at
was
Lake
my first
Elizabeth.
meeting with you. Yeah.
Yeah, that was cool. That was
Yeah,
cool.
it was cool. I mean, you're from the Bay Area, so you have no idea how cool it was for me to be in the Bay for the first time.
Yeah, to
Be
come
in
out.
Boots Valley
Yeah.
and the Deep to Bandoko. You know what I mean? It was cool. It was just cool. Yeah.
What's crazy is a lot of people don't know that me and Boots were friends in high school. That
Nice.
Boots. So I used to go to a high school called Oceana, and I had a DJ crew. And then one of my crew moved to the East Bay, and then he joined a group that was Boots and this other dude. And so he was a DJ for them because we were just a crew. We were just DJ. And then he was like, "Yo, you got to be my boy Boots." Now in those days, it was high top fade days.
Yeah.
So Boots had one of the biggest high top fades. So it was me, Boots, and Sway. We had the biggest high top fades in the Bay.
Nice.
And
Nice.
so we would hang out. But the dude that Boots was rapping with was like a new edition type of fool. You feel what I'm saying? And he didn't like, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, he was one of these new edition, if it is in love, you know what I'm saying? And so like,
he still had the curl while y'all were rocking.
He did. He had the S curl. You know how you have the S curl? You know how the S curl with the tight fade? You know what I'm saying? Like, he looked like Bobby Brown's like broke roadie or something. You know what I'm saying? Well, he was trying to do it. And after a while, Boots was like, but that guy's brother had the studio. So if they would want to make a real grimy track, he'd be like, "No, man, we got to do it. If it is." He'd be like that. So like Boots left and then created the coup. That's hella crazy.
Well, I mean, that's a great Genesis story for the coup because it sounds like it was a long time coming. I was gonna ask you not about his bandmate in high school, but I know your world civilizations teacher was about through with both of y'all. That's the real dilemma. Like your history teacher was like, dude, okay, it's not Africana studies every day. Tell me Greek mythology in English class was a real time.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah, no joke. Yeah, man. Now shout out to the coup. Yeah, man. You know what I'm saying? Rest in peace, DJ Pam, the Funkstress.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? I miss her. She was amazing.
Yes.
In fact, I met her the same day she met Boots. That's what was crazy. There was like a hip hop convention.
I wish I had a chance to meet her. But that was a dope. I can't remember the name of the restaurant. It was right in downtown Oakland. I believe it was either Black owned or at least minority owned. And we just chopped it up. Boots gave me the best. I asked all of you the same 15 question set, right? And Boots' answer about R. Kelly at a moment when that scandal had first kind of broke, is going into the Universal Hip Hop Museum, and I just can't wait for you and you know what I mean. Boots
That's gonna be
everyone, the
bonkers,
everyone.
man.
You know what I mean from those interviews.
Thank you for including me, man. That's crazy.
Time. Hell yeah! Thank you for having us. Yeah.
So tell the people what you do. Cause like I could say that you do documentary films, but you are an amazing person who does a lot. So.
I shifted. I'm an urban planner, really, right? And the shift happened once I realized that media and that technology in order to create documentary films was getting so much more accessible. And I loved that, right? I loved it because it meant that, you know, whereas it started with this high-end stuff that I brought into public school classrooms in order to teach young people to use, and that's where it started for me anyway. It developed in a quick 10 years into, you know, $800 or less, more affordable technology that people could get their hands on in the hood right alongside you.
Right, and start shooting.
And film and shoot their own music videos. So it was peace and it was love. But at the end of the day, what I started to deflect back to, not just because there was a market for it, because there's hardly a market for it, really, unfortunately, especially as Black planners, but I started to kind of deflect back to my research skills, you know, and my capacity for research-based writing. Because I realized that, you know, as community folk, as, you know, grassroots folks, as Black folk, which is what my priority is for my company, we're going to gravitate towards the arts naturally. It's just who we are as a people. But if you are the one with the PhD and you're the one that can write the grants for clients and you can write strategic plans for clients, then go where you're needed most, you know? And so that story, it's very common for Black female activists, right? To kind of fill that plug that's needed. But for me, it was like, okay, you have these two parts of your brain. And whereas it is still fun to just kind of whip it out and take some great photographs every now and again, the part that's needed most in your community is the part that not everyone knows how to do because they just weren't trained to, you know? So,
and here you come.
I'm an urban planner. I'm an urban planner.
That is beautiful. That is beautiful. So, you know, despite being an urban planner, you know a lot about hip hop.
I do know a lot about hip hop.
You've observed many things. But that's because they're young. Kids don't know nothing.
Yeah, they don't know nothing. Like, what are they
can't listen to them young people.
You know what I mean? But every now and again, I put them on, and we have these epic kind of battles back and forth with, you know, playing DJ one song at a time, who's gonna oust the other person in a particular round. You know, so yeah, you know, we get it in. That's
beautiful.
Yeah, they learn.
So, you know, when I look around, I see a lot of things that deal with like women in hip hop, and I got a lot of questions, and I'm not a woman, so I figured I needed somebody knowledgeable on deck, and I think you're perfect.
The nice thing is that you didn't think that you couldn't learn from a woman about her perspective on hip hop, because a lot of male journalists just think I'm not a woman.
They do, huh? They be thinking they know it.
Or so I don't have to talk about it, even worse. You know what I mean? Like, I can understand an informed opinion, but like, you know, the worst is when it's like, oh, I only have to talk about women in hip hop when, you know, my station says we can do a guest journalist from, you know, or whatever that's whack.
Let's get a woman in to see how she feels about Queen Latifah. You're like,
yeah, it's women's
There's so many other women.
It's
like, shout out to Queen Latifah, but still, there's others. You know what I'm saying?
To her. And
she's amazing.
Yeah. You know? The legacy. She's Jersey. Shout out to Jersey on that one.
You know what? Do you know that song that she did on the soundtrack to New Jersey Drive? And it's got Bismarck.
I don't remember it offhand.
It's like, I can't forget New Jersey. Can't forget New Jersey.
I remember it.
Yo, that track makes me want to be from Jersey. Every time I hear that song, I gotta move. I gotta move.
My favorite one from her is Just Another Day. You know, just like
I was listening to that yesterday.
Kind of like, you know, that's my favorite.
Oh my. You know what I'm saying? Like, hey,
that's my favorite one from her. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So where should we start talking about women in hip hop? I'm not sure where to start because there's so much going on. There are so many things to talk about.
There are so many things to talk about, and there's so many different ways that people try to kind of pigeonhole this discussion of women in hip hop to that conversation about hypersexuality and, is it feminist or is it not? I want to go in a completely different direction. I want to talk about
wherever
love.
you want. This
I
is
want to talk
yes.
about love. Yeah, I remember we said we were going to kind of hone in on this idea of all love.
Love is important, especially right now.
I mean? And I feel like it's been such a predominant part of women in hip hop, but it's not often talked about because in those spaces, we get a more diversified set of representations beyond just the hypersexual female. So whereas the hypersexual female is still important and still factors in the conversation of love, there's so many more women inside of these conversations about love, right? There's the hook girl, there's the jump off, but there's also, right, the queen of hip hop soul, right? So I just want to be able to talk about all of
the
these
full spectrum.
Yeah, and I think love as a theme in hip hop gets us that easiest when it comes to women's representations.
It's really deep now because now that you mention it, I mean, I remember LL Cool J's I Need Love song being huge. Like, I remember it, and I remember when I heard it, even as young as I was like, that's going to be a whole thing. You know what I mean? Like, I knew rap love songs were going to be a thing. And I was like, wow. And then you look how many that have come since then. However, I'm trying to think of the first women's love rap that I remember.
You know what? Honestly, I think that you don't have to go too much farther than your earliest posse cut. So let's just go to the very first one, Shyrock, right? 4 + 1 more, right?
Hey, that song is so hard.
Love is embracive enough where by the time you put this assembly of something like Community in hip hop, and those posse records are great for that.
Yeah.
Then that balance and that duality becomes so important to our understanding of what a whole hip hop body politic is supposed to look like,
Real.
And so I didn't meet Shyrock until way later, right? But by the time I met her and, given our age differential, I was like, oh, you were the Black girl in hip hop that we should have learned about first because you're the first lady of hip hop. Now talk about that as an identity, right?
Yeah.
You're the first lady of hip hop. You're the first female to get on wax. You know what I mean? And so, just this idea that hip hop is presidential before Michelle Obama. You know what I mean? Like everybody kind of talked about how
that's real.
Michelle Obama and their relationship with Jay-Z and Beyonce, as the first family, and kind of us, my president is Black, right? The Jeezy song,
that's right.
Hip hop as presidential, but not in terms of the way in which Shyrock narrates her narrative, right? She's the first lady of hip hop. We were already, right?
Yeah.
Governing a body of people in a way that wasn't strict formal government, but still has everything to do with our norms, our politics.
And was still real to us.
Culture. Very real to us.
Right.
More real in a lot of cases than the presidency, right? So if we didn't see representation until Michelle and Barack, we have an entire 40-something year history prior to them coming in.
That's
of
real.
Just kind of coming to terms with how we're going to identify in this culture. What are we going to call it? Why are we calling it that? What are the elements, right? So to have Shyrock as the first female MC helped to carve out that identity, particularly because she was in the middle of, this posse record with all guys, right? So we were at least teasing out from a very early moment what it was going to like to have Black male space and Black female space inside of hip hop and how they were going to rock a party together,
That's huge. That's
Black
huge.
love. Black
so
love.
How do you see love evolve in hip hop over the years in the ways that most struck you or impressed you?
I think the dopest of the dope female MCs, and I won't even do a kind of list formation because it runs antithetical to the way in which women approach the culture, right?
Right, makes sense.
So whereas, a kind of capital H history with your top 5 dead or alive kind of follows in the format of a civics lesson, right? Your founding fathers. for women, I don't even think they care to rank, right? You know what I mean?
True. Yeah.
But on the same lines, you know, it's just the dopest of the dope MCs have just kind of start with self-love first.
Right.
Right. And this is how you get it articulated by people like Queen Latifah and by people like MC Light, right?
Georgie
like
Porgy.
Yeah, hell yeah.
That song is live, man. I love
all
Georgie
hail
Porgy.
the Queen. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's just kind of like a self-love, self-representation that shows you who they are as a woman, and then kind of slides you into an understanding of community love next, right?
Man,
And like what their role is in this space, right?
It's so deep. It's so deep you say that, because as you said that, I remember my favorite song from Latifah, even though I talked about that Jersey song, which I really, really, really do love.
Yeah.
Off her first album, do you remember the song she had with Daddy-O called The Pros? It was to a reggae beat. But the thing is that the reggae beat wasn't a reggae beat that's regular. It actually came from Miles Davis.
I'm showing my age because it's like I had these records, but it's been
so long. No. I know.
What I will say is that reggae beat during that era, right?
Yeah.
Was popularized by New Jersey rappers like Poor Righteous Teachers, right?
And
you know, because I'm in Trenton. Right, just kind of quickly remark on that history and how they feel like, you know, rightfully so, that their kind of forays into that reggae element were prior to KRS's even. You know what I mean? In terms of like what they were doing in the space and what it means to take that quick hour-and-a-half trek, you know what I mean, up to New York City and to come down, you know, which many rappers did. So like, yeah, I mean, that sound is familiar, even though the record doesn't immediately pop.
Yo, that song is so dope. It's produced so well. I think Daddy-O produced that too. And it's like a duo track between them. And like, when you talk about like this holistic community vibe thing, like I felt like it was very much embodied in that song.
Yeah.
Radio.
I mean, I think that what has always been different about my approach to hip hop scholarship, and this is not a knock at all to a more formal approach.
Yeah.
I get why it is that history has to be challenged and kind of historicized in much the same ways as any other kind of history for us too, right? You got to know those records, you got to know those dates. Is because I am a Black feminist, right? And so I have like a conscious rejection to kind of like, you know, throwing a title and a date, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it can be like
more like a vibe, you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Because it can get too clinical.
It can get too clinical, and it's like, you know, the reality is what gets written down is history, what gets recorded in the industry is history, even worse, right? Isn't always the official record on what was actually going down inside the culture in these different spaces, right?
For real.
And so even when we fight to make it the official record, right? I'm thinking back to KRS real fast, like this idea of the bridge is over, right? Even when we fight to make it a historical record, there's always going to be somebody in the space that was already kind of fighting, right, for recognition at the same time, even if they didn't achieve that recognition at the same time. That's why I love Chuck D's definition, you know, of just kind of historicization for hip hop, where he's like, look, hip hop is Black culture. We go back thousands of years. Like, stop getting hung up. You know
right. You know what I'm saying? It was August 11th in 1973 with, you know what I'm saying? And it's like, are you sure? So you saying on August 10th, hip hop wasn't around?
Exactly. And if those guys were rocking the party, who was home watching their kids? Straight up.
You know what I mean?
Back to women in hip hop. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, what sorts of spaces at that moment became integral for the production of hip hop that are always going to be overlooked because it's not on the other side of the microphone, or it's not on top of the cardboard. You know what I mean? Like, what are we missing in terms of like supportive networks? So it's no different than like going back and fighting to reclaim these women from the civil rights movement who, you know, really rode the front of the bus first, or, you know.
Right.
And so, whatever other kind of movement.
One of the things that I've been wrestling with the last few days, like I was talking with my parents a few days ago, and they were, have you heard this new song called WAP? And I was like, oh no. right? And I was like, yeah. And then my dad was like, have you heard it? Have you seen the video? What do you think? And I was like, I said, I'm not gonna lie, man. I said, like, it's a cool song. I'm not mad at it, and I don't love it. Like, I understand why it's big. Like, I get it. Like, artistically, I understand why it's big, and I am a fan of Cardi B lyrically. Megan Thee Stallion, I haven't listened to that much of her work, so I'm not gonna critique her artistically. Not mad at the song, not mad at the video. And my mom was like, well, why is it such a big deal? And everybody's upset. I haven't seen it. And I said, well, I think the issue is that every 20 years, a Black woman does something sexually powerful in music, and the planet goes nuts.
Nuts. And especially when you're home in a pandemic and you got, the time in your hand.
And I was like, the planet goes nuts. I said, but I didn't see anything that Lil' Kim didn't do.
Right.
I didn't see anything.
All right, so here's the thing.
That Millie Jackson, like, even before hip hop, you got like Millie Jackson, you know what I mean? Like, doing a lot of sexualized music stuff. And I said, I still think the planet's not okay or at peace with the sexuality of Black women. And that's why every 20 years, everybody loses their mind. But under that umbrella of like Black sexuality and like this whole polarity thing of desire between like how Black women are rejected publicly but desired privately and all this other stuff, I said, I don't think the song's that big of a deal. I mean, Kylie Jenner, her scenes should have been cut down or she could have been given a different role. But outside of that, I wasn't really offended. I thought it was well made. I thought, you know what I mean? For young people of this generation, I see why it's a big deal, but I also see why it's problematic as a father of 2 Black girls. You know what I'm saying? Like, what are your thoughts?
So, okay, before we kill it, right? I do think that the basic premise of the argument that's going to come out for me is that the message, the imagery, the lyrics are redundant at this point, right? They're an extension of something that Lil' Kim probably best popularized, that some really articulate journalists that I saw in the middle of the space kind of reminded me is still an extension of Salt and Pepper, and you know what I mean? Like,
and Foxy Brown.
And, like things kind of coming earlier in hip hop, but that Lil' Kim kind of sort of best popularized and created a formula inside the industry for other rappers, right? But coming on the heels of this domestic violence incident that Megan Thee Stallion recently, encountered, I do think that there's an argument for it to be an expression of female solidarity, where you have Cardi B as a more established rapper in the game, reaching out at this critical moment and saying, look, we're going to make a mega hit. I don't know how you plan to get over this shooting incident, but we're literally, like, I mean, real talk, you know what I mean? Like, if we're going to be survivors in this space, we're going to dig deep and, kind of come together in a moment in expression of solidarity. I didn't think it was best articulated from a visual standpoint inside of the video, but I did love the album cover. And what I loved about the cover art, right, was that when you look at it, first of all, it's well composed, right, well lit, this idea of a diptych, right? It's not 2 photos next to each other, but it gives off that look because they're trying to make them look so similar. Right. If it were not for the curvature of their tongue, I might have missed it, especially in the scroll generation. I'm serious. Like, I was looking at it, staring at it, like, oh, that's kind of dope. Okay. Oh, it's both of their record. All right, but who's on the cover? Oh, that's both of them, right? So on the one hand, it's actually an even visually expressed solidarity, right? We're mirroring each other. We're standing next to each other at a moment where this is a PR nightmare for you at best, right? And at worst, it's an incident of domestic violence. At least that's how it's shaping up.
Like, and questionably attempted murder. You know what I'm saying?
Questionably. Like, was he a bad shot? Or, what I mean?
So,
what was it?
The more that I come across it, it seems like he was shooting at her feet to make her dance, like to kind of punk her. And some of the bullet fragments hit the ground and then hit her foot. You see what I'm saying?
So when you take it there, right? And when you get that now post Rihanna and Chris Brown, right? Way, way, way post D Barnes, Dr. Dre, right? You know what I mean? We have to have moments where instead of just feeding it over to news media and having that be, right, the spectacle about Black female body at the moment, I'm going to give you a hit record. And I don't think Cardi B gave it to her. I think they were both accomplished enough MCs to come together on a track. But they said, look, you know, this is what I mean by all love. Like, if the constant dialectic in hip hop is Black women, Black men, right? It's a very heteronormative culture. So if that's the constant, it is actually slightly revolutionary to see two Black women in the wake of domestic violence incident have a hit record inside of
that
hip-hop,
shakes the planet, though.
right?
That shakes the planet.
Exactly.
That shatters records. You know what I'm saying?
You know? A hit record. And there's a formula for it, right? Like one of the videos I was looking at in order just to express my own internal excitement about today was that Remy Ma Little Kim record that recently came up, Wake Me Up, right? And that video where basically Kim's only in the video because Remy Ma is challenging Kim. She's channeling, Kim, right? And so even though Kim doesn't spit on that track, it's so much of her lyrics, so much of her presentation,
and her
so
energy
much of
and the vibe,
her energy that they black out in the middle of that video. It's a much better video.
and Remy Ma, I think Remy Ma is as big as she is because of the TV stuff. I gotta say that as an MC, I still think she's undersold. I think she's underappreciated. I think she's under-acknowledged for her lyricism and her looks. Like, she's dope, man. She's got a dope dress code. She got dope bars. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. You know, like her relationship with Papoose, who's also a dope rapper. Like, it's just, it says a lot.
Yeah, she got lost in the posse cut, which is a shame, right? Because that's where that happens to a lot of women, right? So unlike, I love the new Nas album. I hope you do too, right?
I haven't heard it yet. That's my homework for today. That's my homework for today. That's
your homework for today, says Dr. Gilliam. You need to go check that out. So you know they reinvented the firm, right?
Yes.
So Fox still had a moment where even if it was alongside Jay-Z or if it was inside of this firm, right?
Right.
She got stuck in, you know, moments of the posse cut, but she still had her own identity. Right. I think Remy Ma has had a tougher time breaking out from that.
Which is strange, actually.
Go ahead.
To your point, it's strange because you're right, but I trip because of all of the media popularity around her jail entry and release. It's weird that she's still not getting it, although she should. But I think that you've hit something really, really, really.
It's weird, but in the case of her squad, at least, even Fat Joe didn't let the identity of their posse cut overshadow the depth and significance of Big Pun. Right? So even Fat Joe took a step back. Like, that's what's kind of fair and even and balanced about her posse. You know what I mean? Like, her whole crew fell back in a way that was more homage. Right?
Real.
And I think that, you know, if she were in like a flip mode squad like Rod Digger was, where she still had a giant in the way of Busta Rhymes in order to anchor to if she wanted to, but still could spit hard as hell as lyricist, right? Shout out to
Rod Digger is underappreciated.
Underappreciated, but has independent
Harriet Tubman.
Harriet Tubman, you know,
ladies and gentlemen,
Chuck D was 4 years ago. You know what I mean?
Yo, so man, I'm trying to tell you, man, like Rod Digger, man.
Yeah, she's dope.
Bars.
And she's just a beautiful person and an educator, an amazing educator. Right?
Yeah, and I mean, like, even Heather B.
You know, and I, you know, Heather B. Shout out to this, the idea of kind of having MTV, BET at its height, push you onto a stage in a way that said, we have this thing, it's reality TV. We don't know what we're going to do with it yet, but let's, you know, think about what it means to have Puffy identify in the space and have these other, you know, like rappers.
I mean, and she's just so dope as an artist, her knowledge of hip hop, like how funny she is, how much drive as a human being she had to know how rare she was, how skilled she was, how focused she had to be. I mean, it's hard not to just be incredibly.
Heather B and Rod Dicker are great examples of this idea of what I was saying about what's going on behind the scenes, right? Like, show me a hip hop that gets at that sixth element. That's my element, right? Knowledge. It's like, show me what you're doing. And that doesn't mean that the tightest lyricists we have are not deeply intellectual. Of course, we know they are, right? But show me what you're doing in your community as an educator. Show me what you're doing in your community as a planner. Show me what you're doing as a grassroots organizer, right? So that I know that, you know, all of what we consume in hip hop is not just what we pay for in hip hop, but instead it has some real life tangible value on the ground. You know what I mean? Like, what kind of love are you showing back to whatever hood you're working in?
Well, see, this goes back to something I wrote about years ago, and I was saying, like, you know, rappers need to stop shouting out their hood. Like, I'm tired of hearing people yell Brooklyn or Oakland or whatever, right? Like, if you're from that city, they should know because you invest in the schools in that city. If you're from that city, they should know because you didn't put money into all of this grill, you put it into this rec center. You didn't put it into, you know what I'm saying?
Good luck. Good luck on
a new outfit. You didn't put it into a new outfit or a new car that you can drive around your hood in and show off on everyone. You put it, you know what I'm saying, into a technological fund that these kids can create their own businesses. So when you speak about love, like that stuff hits with me. You know, that's what resonates with me.
Exactly. And it hits with hip hop women. Like, I think that that's our deepest contribution, right? So whereas we allowed for a space of balance, I learned this lesson actually from Africa Bambaataa directly. I went up in order to film the president, Rocky Bucano, of UHHM for BAM's radio station in Harlem, right? Or his radio program on the station in Harlem. And I thought I was just going to be, you know, the documentarian behind the lens. And BAM played like 5 Cyrock records until I got the point. And then was like, that's your seat right there. Let me hear what you have to say. The whole idea of hip hop is balance, right? You can't present a masculine voice and not have a feminine voice as its counterpoint. And I'm like, you know what? That's dope. And yes, I'll sit down because I do have something to say. And I think that what women have consistently done in hip hop, those that have reached, you know, the mic, or those that have reached, you know, the cardboard, or those that got up, right, on the building, they have allowed for men to have that kind of macho presentation, which unfortunately got lost in the, you know, excessive capitalism
right
era into the new millennium hip hop, and let them kind of poke their chest out and be capital H historians, whereas the women in hip hop have supported that from a more auxiliary standpoint. And said, look, I'll play the background, but don't get it twisted. There's a lot more folk in the back.
A lot.
right? A lot more folk in the back. So if you have that front and center, right? You know what I mean? And you see this even within the confines of the industry, right? Talk about, like, you know, Dream Hampton and Kiernan Mayo, and, you know, like some of the dopest female writers for the Source magazine. Akiba Solomon, most certainly, right? Some of the dopest female writers for our hip hop Bible, Joan Morgan, were people who, you know, were writing the history while men were occupying the history. Right. And so it's just kind of like, you know, there's a way in which women have always done that kind of extension of, look, I have no problem giving you a voice inside of a culture, but it's the very few and far in between opportunity outside of sports for you to gain a mainstream platform, right? But don't ignore the fact that if hip hop is in fact a culture, and that's how you're narrating it, right? That all of that other extension of life that happens in and around gets nurtured by, and, you know, in large part led by Black women.
So now let's bring it back to this issue of love. When the situation happened with Tory, when the situation between Tory Lanez and Megan happened, I was waiting for the wave of cancel to hit this fool. I was waiting to see what Black men in hip hop were going to step up and be like, nah, son, never. let me explain what's fixing to happen, bro. When you get seen, bing, boom, you know what I'm saying? I was waiting to see that.
Yep.
And
there was a precedent for it, right? I remember in the case of Rihanna that, you know, Jay-Z wasn't afraid to go on record and say, look, I'm canceling Chris Brown, at least for a while.
Yeah.
You understand what I mean? Like, and he has the kind of power to cancel folks. So even him articulating it from his position of power was a huge statement in hip hop, right?
It was very huge.
So it had a precedent. It definitely had a precedent. But I think that there have been some other sort of messy things going on in hip hop contemporaneously. And I'm thinking right now about, on the one hand, you have the rise within this pandemic of the People's Party. I hope you're following that with Talib Kweli and Jasmine Lee. And they're, you know, bossing out that platform. But then in his Twitter space, it's like, what happened between Reese and Talib Kweli? And
that seems to be a
beefing
strange,
right?
that whole story is strange. And I think it's going to be a while before any of us know exactly what the hell was going on with all of that. It's very layered. It's very strange. And I'll be honest, I don't get it. I'd be lying if I told you I understood it. I don't understand what's happened.
It's messy. I think that one of the byproducts of the Me Too movement, right, is that people are getting ahead of what might be some kind of formal, you know, attack in the way of justice agents, right?
Right.
By creating their statement and creating their say. Now, I have been a fan of the speak out model. Like I said, I am a feminist. I get that it has its role, it has its place, right? But hip hop, in a way, has always had kind of like back of house and front of house conversations. But in the age of social media, all of that is collapsing. Because you can have an entire comment thread. I feel like that's what happened in the way of Talib. You can have an entire comment thread follow underneath something that was completely unrelated to this incident between you and this other person. And it's like, well, you have to stop and talk about it because that's what your public wants, and you can read it and they can read it. Right. They can read it from each other. So it's like, it's forcing journalism to become a little bit more democratic, which is a good thing, right? You know, like it's not just about what Viacom put out anymore, you know? But it's also meaning that you get these kind of messy, unexplained, you know, not clear about all the details, presentations of what is back to love, right? A kind of complicated love dynamic between heterosexual men and women inside of hip hop that is age old. Right? And so, like, if you start with self-love and you go to community love, that idea of love in a heterosexual context is where we push out all of the anxiety we have about unreconciled issues inside of our community, and we pull in, right, hyper realized definitions and manifestations of our presentation of self-love to balance what is, you know, kind of like a very difficult way to find self in the middle of community trauma, right? And
a lot of community trauma,
you know. So
well, let me ask you.
I feel like that's the rest of it, and it's still all up, right?
So
because you're testing out that violence.
So like the thing that I wrestle with just from my generation of hip hop, right? Like I'm gonna say something that's kind of crazy because I actually don't remember it, and I should. I was in an anthology of hip hop in 1993, 94. It was probably one of the first anthologies I was in. I don't think it was actually a hip hop anthology. I think it was just like a black anthology. But I was writing about hip hop, but maybe there was a few others, so it felt hip hop heavy. Absolutely. Long story short, I'll remember what it is later. But there was a woman who wrote an article in that. The first time I saw this argument was, her name was Shelly Lazar. And what she was writing about was an instance where she either was at a club, either backstage or something, and she saw a woman either get disrespected or slapped. I don't remember, right? Like somebody either like called her a bitch or like slapped her. There were all of these fully capable men around who did nothing. And it was her saying, man, like, y'all are cowards. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is not cool. You know what I'm saying? And I hella felt it. I hella felt it, right? And then I remember like the era of, you know, early PE, S1Ws. Man, let me tell you, if you think you was going to be at a show disrespecting women, like shoving them and, you know, calling women out their name, but the S1Ws would change your entire like physical structure based on that. Like you wouldn't make it out of the venue. You know what I'm saying? Even Pac, who can be very controversial because of what happened. Like I knew Pac personally. He loved black women. He would absolutely knock hella fools out and clap fools over black women. And so fast forward to now, when I see Megan Thee Stallion and I see all this silence, I hear Shelly's echo. I'm like, y'all just really gonna sit here and let him shoot at this girl? Huh? And potentially mess her feet up. She's a dancer and that's cool. Nobody's gonna speak to that. Nobody's gonna talk about how this dude weighs possibly 100 pounds. And you know what I'm saying? Like, I know a ton of women that could choke him out. I ain't even gonna get into like dudes putting hands on him. You know what I'm saying? Like, just because I'm a martial artist, I know women who handle food. So I'm saying, like, I'm disappointed in not just the silence, but what that silence says nationally about black men within themselves. Like, we should be more diligent about protecting black women in the space of hip hop, period, irrespective of how they rap, dress, look, topic. And it's that's bothering me. That's bothering me.
Sneak peek to that interview with Boots Riley and that conversation about R. Kelly that we talked about at the beginning, right? So this was, if you remember, because it was the same weekend I met you. This was like 2004, 2005.
I think it was
like that, right? And so this is at a moment where these tapes are just first leaking, right? First leaking. And his basic premise for his argument was our lives, right? So community love first. Our lives as black men and black women have historically had less value, right, than white lives. Right? So whereas white young people, this is him explaining it, white young people are allowed to just kind of travel the world and live life and maybe, you know, do this other excursion before going into college in their 20s. We were on the farms forced out of the house to go work at 13, 14 years old. So even when it's a minor, right? And we've now seen this in the case of R. Kelly, but we've also seen it in the case of Africa Bambaataa, right? And the accusations of him having molested 13, 14, 15-year-old boys, right? Our lives, even from a very young age, become adulterized as such that we're forced to go out and work and become whole, full-fledged independents at such a young age, right? So,
and that's one of the biggest crimes America has ever perpetrated on black children.
When people are not fighting for us as black women, it's because it's been a good 10, 15 years that the expectation is you already know how to fight for yourself at best. Right? So inside of these domestic violence relationships, it's like, oh, well, that's an issue between the two of them because she may not be physically stronger than him, but nevertheless, she made an independent decision to enter into that relationship. And so whatever hell she pays going through it,
then that's hers and his. Right.
That's problematic as fuck, but it's also historic as hell. Right, which is what I think Boots was trying to explain. It's like, you know, like where our lives are not valued the same, right, as the quote unquote majority inside of this country. Right.
And with that comes.
Given that. Go ahead.
What you're saying is really hitting me hard, because with that comes. There's so many levels of this. There's so many levels to this. And, you know, when I look at, you know, I'll give you an example. I remember when Fetty Wap came out, you know, Trap Queen, right? He came out with Trap Queen.
Yeah, I do.
That one-eyed dude.
As a president, I think that he's Fetty Whack, but that's just my
So
that's
like,
one where me and my kids just didn't see eye to eye on that.
yeah,
But
yeah.
go ahead.
I remember, so I was teaching 7th and 8th grade at that time. And I was just rolling out the Hip Hop Chess Federation actual methodology. So this was the first group of kids who was going to learn, you know what I mean? How chess and life were connected, blah, blah. So one day we were at a Stanford tour. And I was walking next to this one girl. She, you know, it's always bad for girls when they look old for their age in the hood. You know what I mean? Because the dudes are going to be predatory and whatnot.
Frightening.
You know, it's horrible, right? And she's like really tall for her age. She's got these crazy, weird green eyes. And you could just see the boys just go bonkers whenever she just shows up to class. And so she was like, Mr. Bishop, do you know the Fetty Wap? And I was like, no. And she was like, you want to hear? And I was like, yes. So then like she gives me and I'm like, right? Like I'm like, I'm trying not to act like it's a trip. You know what I'm saying? Because like the kids are like, you knew Eazy-E and Pac. This can't be, you know what I'm saying? This can't be harmful to you verbally, but I'm just like, right? And
like, are you sure?
I was like, yo. So then I listened to the song and I'm like, do you like this song? And she's like, yes, very much. And I was like, okay. And I didn't say nothing else. But like later, I learned that like she's got a boyfriend her age who's physically abusive. Her age. She was 14. She was dating another 14-year-old boy and he was beating her. And I was like, what is her worldview of men, life, love, etc. supposed to be when at 14? She doesn't even have an innocent boyfriend-girlfriend relationship. Those aren't, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So then I'm pulling the boy aside and I'm like, yo, yeah, I heard you get, you know, violent and stuff. Like, it's not going to work. You need to, you know what I mean? And he's like, kind of, oh, okay, you know? Yeah. But like, I hate that I know that that's her history. And that's one girl in one city in one time. And that is nothing compared to the global pandemic of violence heaped upon girls and women around the world. And it's like, it bothers me. And I feel helpless as a man to stop it. You know what I'm saying? I raise a son who don't act like that. But that's one son in one city, in one country.
I get it. All right. All love, right? There is a history that Black women have authored inside of hip hop that gives us a solution here, right? And, you know, structural solutions, I'm all for concrete commitments, right? I'm thinking about Lauryn Hill's Rebel here, right? And this idea that if our lives are cheap, right? And she literally says that, and, you know, you think our lives are cheap, right? You know, while the other people sleep, this is what we should be doing. We should be rebelling. And I think that now that we have Rhapsody, right? And because we already slept on Bahamadia.
Right. Bahamadia,
right?
Though.
And Medusa. Right? And all of these other women that were telling us the whole time, right? Shout out.
Yo, shout out to Medusa who just dropped a track with Arts on that's bonkers. I just had to tell you that. It's
anyone
really
who's listening to this Women in Hip Hop podcast because they're just dying to see an intimate conversation with women in hip hop, go grab Rachel Ramis. She's the filmmaker. Nobody Knows My Name. It's got Medusa in it, Bahamadia in it.
Great pioneer.
Right now,
shout out to her.
Yeah. Who the third MC is that she shadows. Bahamadia hits like a hot 70 bars nonstop in it. Medusa's all in her natural element on stage, as well as just kicking back with her fro in her house. You know what I mean?
Man.
Like,
Come on, man.
Just showing you an intimate profile with these three women. So go watch that film. But we've had examples, right, of hip hop women that have already called out the nonsense and said, look, right, I don't care if you're my ex, in the case of Wyclef, right? I don't care if you think that this live album is not up to par with Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. You're going to sit there, MTV studio audience, and whoever else watches this and buys it, and listen to me repeat this chord right, on a guitar, right? We're
Real.
gonna dumb down the music and give you some real lyrics. And the expectation is you are supposed to rebel. This is before Tarana Burke starts an entire Me Too movement, for better or for worse, right? No matter where you come in, she said, I am going to create an entire movement against the sexual violence of Black women and girls in particular, right? That can then have the kind of salience and extension to do a Sandusky case, do, you know what I mean? Bill Cosby, right? America's Black Father. In a public media. And I have my feelings and my beefs about anything that, allows justice agents to peek in on, things that we could be dealing with direct inside of our community, right? Like you said, somebody may need to step to Tory Lanez, right? But the idea, right, that we can create a movement around just, rebelling against the very issue that touches both genders, this idea that our lives are cheap, that our lives are not valued, as Boo said explicitly, from very young ages, that we were raped on the plantations, so why not get raped, right? Financially, personally, physically, right? Emotionally, psychologically, right? All over American media, right? To this present day, hundreds of years later. Right. And so, yes, we have an obligation. We have responsibility. Queen Latifah was on that from way back. You know what I mean? We have an obligation. We have a responsibility to take it back to our communities and say, not only is this your presentation of self-love as I identify in it, but it's part of a larger Pan-Africanist history. Do your homework. You know what I mean? Pick up those books and see a reflection of yourself inside of Queen Hatshepsut. See a reflection of yourself inside of Queen Nzinga, right?
Queen
and
Tai.
No, you don't have to model it direct.
The goddess Tai,
model it direct. You know what I mean? Like Sacagawea. Right? You understand what I mean? Like, no, you don't have to model it direct. You can find it wherever you like. Whether or not you pick up the red, black, and green medallions, or whether or not you pick up the kufis, whether or not you pick up the hijab,
you got the newt goddess hieroglyphics in your wall. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. You know what I mean? And so it's kind of like you can pick up your presentation of self-love as long as it's a reflection of how beautiful we are as a people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
All love means, what do we all look like? And rather than be our lowest form, right? Or rather than be too narrow a definition of what that representation of Black womanhood or Black manhood is supposed to look like, right? You could be a gangster, but seeing as how there have been X amount of rappers that have already been gangsters, you know what I mean? What do you know about Tupac Amaru Shakur, right? And how does that nuance your presentation of gangster at the very least a little bit, right? And give you a deeper understanding of it that we can support inside of film, right? John Singleton did a great job with not just Tupac and his rebranding and re-imaging, but also Janet Jackson. Right? And we can kind of come together, right, with an understanding of what new representations of Black womanhood and Black malehood could look like, in order so that we don't get stuck as the survivors of sexual or any other gender-based violence, right? The survivors of gang violence, the survivors of, homicide, right? Like, we have other alternatives for where we end up, and they're only going to be reached if we set up a new presentation of who we are from the outset,
So I want to run something by you. Those were amazing points. I want to run something by you that's been sitting on my head and heart for a while. So it's always been a problem to me that as hip hop grew, prison culture became hip hop culture. I always hated that. You know what I mean? I was hoping it would be the other way around. You know what I mean? That the hip hop would infect the jails and people would start chilling and being more artistic or whatever. But that's not the way it played out. In the same way, I remember when a rapper named Balance called me in 2003 and he was like, I just got back from Texas, man. I was like, well, what's up? And he was like, I learned that in order to really blow up, you got to have strippers dance to your music. And I was like, well, what do you mean? He goes, well, all the top rappers in Houston, they find strippers who are big. And then they'd be like, hey, I'll pay you to dance to my music. Then the girls dance to the music. And then what do all the dudes want? They want the song that the girl danced to. And then the girls who like those men go buy the song that the girls who dance. Right. Okay. So now fast forward. And in the same way that for men, for black men, prison culture has had too much of an impact on hip hop and how they see it, how they see themselves and the psychology. I feel like in a WAP America, that stripper culture, okay, for the men, what starts as like this holistic hip hop culture gets kind of like carved, you know what I mean? And the road gets kind of curved toward prison, right? And so for the women, right, you can come in rapping like Lauryn Hill, but at some point, you're going to get the nails done, extra long hair, short skirt, let's go. And so I hate that. We
became complicit, and it's nothing to like, that's for sure. That is nothing to love. So I hate it too. We became complicit in something that was historical and beyond our control in terms of who's really profiting from these prisons,
and that's like white supremacy is a system.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of who's creating these legislations, right? So maybe if we weren't so interested in Clinton's ability to play the saxophone and possibly be the first non-black black president, we might not have missed the fact that those Rockefeller drug laws were going to run rampant inside of our communities, right? So we became a victim of something that was much larger than the hip hop industry, at least, right? But all love. Like, this is how we became complicit in it. What is very true, that while it's very true that hip hop did grow contemporaneously with prison culture, it also grew contemporaneously with digital culture, right? And so even though we know that from a DJ standpoint, scratch, mix, you know what I mean, breakbeat, hunting, like the whole thing was very technical from its outset. People often sleep on the fact that both digital culture and hip hop were more or less 80s babies. And I know that, you know, like hip hop prides itself on the, you know, the narrative that it was founded and nurtured in the 70s. But when you think about when it kind of grew into mass production, they're both 80s babies.
It's all after 85, right? It's really after 83, 85.
Exactly. So by the time it comes back around to the idea of me being this early person in video and hip hop and what it meant for, you know, accessible technology to reach filmmakers first, right? Like John Singleton and like the Hughes brothers. And, you know, we became complicit in what kind of representations of hip hop culture we wanted to see hit the big screen. Right? Now, I'm certain that there were probably other scripts that landed on the table and Hollywood was like, give me that.
Right.
Was like, I'll put that one out. I'm not really up for your Ava DuVernay yet. Right. But at the end of the day, right, if we had put more love and investment in love, and it didn't always have to be heterosexual love. I hate that it gets framed that way almost exclusively inside of hip hop, right? But if we just put Black love, even at a community level, foremost in our understanding of what those digital representations would have been, then we wouldn't have given up so much information to the man about how to, overpopulate prisons with who we were, right? The insider-outsider communication, we're now back to that, right? What does it mean to give over the identity of what gang culture really is to the police? Right? Mark Hawkins came out. He was on the UHHM board. He taught a class that I was teaching at Monroe College in the Bronx, right? And he came out and he gave like a visual diagram explication of what it meant to have, you know, gang culture take over the streets of LA and how it became, right, easy in a lot of sense for LAPD to then attack, incarcerate, overpopulate in prisons people in Los Angeles, California, right? And so, like, how often have we been so invested in the gangster iconography that's been present in film for decades, right? You know
it's really nuts.
Half a century or longer, you know what I mean? How obsessed were we with that narrative and with that history, and what did it do to kind of give over a little bit too much information about who we are as hip hop to justice agents. So that by the time you reach the late 90s and you have the hip hop police, right? And you
Hip hop
think
police is a
that
real thing,
there's
y'all.
a real thing, and you think that there's a strong possibility that they're implicated in the murders of Tupac and Big, and you know what I mean?
JMJ,
Like, like
Tekashi 6ix9ine's Rise and Fall and Rise. So
how
then,
they get in the first place.
so let me ask you this. Back to the love.
Back to the love.
I look at Black people as a group who probably has Stockholm syndrome. Right?
Most certainly.
Stockholm syndrome, for those that don't know, is when someone is like kidnapped or whatever, and the person who's kidnapped starts to identify and love the person who's kidnapped them. You know,
most certainly
they want to be free. Okay, so I think that as a community, we suffer from group Stockholm syndrome, and so I often wonder, one, like, whatever we are, however great we are, whatever we're good at, we'll never really know what we could have or should have been because we were never free from white supremacy.
We were never free from white
be.
supremacy. Yep. We dove really deep into white supremacy when it was war, because it was a way out of the same communities that we were already enduring post-traumatic stress from, right? My dad did 2 tours in Nam, and he got one of those medals for taking his whole platoon back dead to the helicopter, right? Like, these are very intimate, personal stories.
Unbelievable stories, man.
That extend the post-traumatic stress and disorders and mental health gaps from white supremacy and institutions that were legal and sanctioned and ways out, right?
So
into
then,
an understanding of what strategy and government inside of our communities should look like in the absence of, local politicians that gave a hell about governing our cities.
So I say, right, group Stockholm syndrome. And so then I say to myself, okay, so then how do we begin to cultivate not only a love that was lost, but like an abuse that has become so normal, it's unnormal. It's not normal to love. It's not normal to share our fears, to trust others with our vulnerabilities. It's like if a woman was in an abusive relationship for a long time, it's safe to say she's going to have a hard time having a normal relationship for a certain period of time where she has to reacclimate to what it means to be loved, to acknowledge herself as worthy of love. And so what do we do as a people when this is the problem, and the amplification of people like your Tory Lanez, your Chris Brown, and the perpetual forgiveness and celebrity that they get to exercise? I don't know what to do.
All love. We're in the middle of a pandemic. So let's just pretend like that was the first pandemic we endured. It wasn't, right? But let's just pretend like, you know what I mean? Let's pretend for a moment, right? That 83 to now, you know what I mean? Digital plus hip hop plus prison industrial complex creates trauma, post-industrial stress disorder, alternative government inside of our streets that leads to over-incarceration, but also leads to Stockholm syndrome. Let's pretend like that was our first pandemic, right? So now we're in a real one, and it's a global health crisis. All love, structural solutions, concrete commitments, homeschooling.
Right.
Let's go back to in-house. What can we do to address this inside of our families, however that's defined underneath our roofs, right? Or however long this lasts, about a half a year so far, right? In order to address the way in which we are educating ourselves, right? When you talk about stripper culture, You talked about stripper culture. It reminded me that the 2 Chainz versus Rick Ross versus was the only one where they had strippers. 2 Chainz bought out strippers and was doing, you know what I mean?
That's
the money,
right.
The whole thing, right? That was about the only negative representation of Black women that I have seen in any of these Zooms, Instagram lives,
You're right.
anything that have come out in the last 6 months. Why? Because the same Black men that are central voices in hip hop and have the ability to command the stage, right, even if it is in the middle of a pandemic, are now doing it from their homes.
Right.
So what are you doing in front of your wife, homie? What are you doing in front of your children? How's it tweaking the narrative of hip hop to suddenly make it like the internet is a very beautiful thing? I've loved pandemic internet.
Right.
Because we took it out of the studios at CNN and MSNBC and, you know what I mean, wherever else, right? Yeah. And we put it right in your house. And it naturally changed the dynamic of the presentation of how we associate with one another as a people. That same deep intellectual thought that has always been on a Nas album is now once again inside of a Nas album, right? King's Disease. But the way in which the whole internet universe, at least on my Instagram timeline, is accepting it is like, not only do we have another hip hop classic, but what kinds of graphics are we going to use to celebrate this? How are we going to connect this to George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and everything we were talking about before the album dropped?
Right.
What are we thinking about a different way to talk about Foxy Brown this time around? Like, there's a lot of guest features that are kind of live on that Nas album. But when the firm came back around, not only do we have a reunification of Nas and Cormega, right?
Which
so
is
we
huge.
have a reconciliation of beef. But we got AZ and Fox back, right? And
been waiting on AZ
since
Fox
as a queen. We're talking about Fox as a queen. She's not just a gangster in the firm that wears be clothes and is kind of a knockoff Little Kim. She's like, the queen is back.
Right, doing it.
Fox and her held it down, and they let her rhyme off the track because she was that dope. You know what I mean? And so it's just kind of like, you know, even our presentation, our throwback and archival imagery of what Nas and Cormega and Fox looked back in the day does not look like the WAP video, right? Where we're returning back to this Hype Williams, you know, neon aesthetic of, you know what I mean, like minimalist design. We could have done that for Fox. We could have, you know what I mean? Like, she was there. She was caught up in those same visual images. But instead, it's like, go back and rescue her like how we loved how she looked. You know what I mean? Like, even if she still has the bikini on, let's change the iconography of what that's going to look like. So we're representing her as a queen to my kids who don't know who she is yet.
Right.
You know?
No. That's
so
real.
It's like the conversations about it, the interviews about all of these moments, even the, you know, Megan Tory moment was like, okay, let's stop before we have another Rihanna Chris Brown moment.
Right.
And we lose the opportunity for this rising star, right? This rising woman to gain and have a consistent, you know what I mean, presentation in her culture. Let's give her a dope record and some female solidarity and build her up instead of just breaking her down, you know? And that's pandemic fly to me. If it meant we all had to go back and do it from our homes and look left at our wife or our partner or our kids, whoever you're looking, our grandma, whoever you're living with, you know what I mean? And re-articulate your presentation of hip hop identity, I think pulling back into the homes was a good thing. You know, I started homeschooling my daughter at the beginning of the year. And this is obviously before the pandemic last year. And everybody was like, oh, we don't really have time for that. You know what I mean? Are you doing that just because she just lost her dad? She's always been in a formal school environment. What is she going to miss? And then 6 months later, right, we were all homeschooled.
Everybody homeschooled.
I smelled it coming. Like, you know what I mean?
Yo. In that same vein.
Like,
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, what I want to say was I started we started homeschooling our kid when my son was going from the 6th grade into the 7th. That's when we did it. So when we did
and
it.
I did do it in part because her dad passed.
Right.
Because a little bit extra mother's love not only
makes a hell of a difference.
Coronavirus, it gets you through all those other pandemics that we've endured leading up to the late 80s. You know what I mean?
Speak on it.
Overpopulation in prisons.
Well, it's deep, right? So the reason we did it is because my son was always brilliant. And he was killing it in every class but math. His math teacher was extra hard on him and working hard to keep him off honor roll. Her grade was always the one that kept him off honor roll. And so she would find these really small, granular reasons to always undercut his test score. Oh, well, you see, he wrote his name sideways on this one. Oh, well, on this one, you know, and my ex-wife was like, this boy is brilliant. What is she doing? And he would be so excited because he was always on honor roll. And then that year, every time, she was the reason, she was the reason, she was the reason. At the same time, my daughter was not doing as well, but she actually dealt with the situation of her brain just worked different. Like, for instance, she couldn't, if you gave her 20 plus 30, she couldn't add it, but she could multiply it. She could multiply it. We don't know why. Right. So they were like, oh, she needs special ed. She needs special ed. And I looked in special ed and they were all Black and Latino. I said, y'all ain't sending my daughter. So we went to a thing. They said, oh, well, you know, then they start trying to guilt you out as a Black parent. Well, if your ego is in the way, so you won't let them, you know, if you're too proud to let them be in special ed, you're only really hurting them, trying to attack you about your intent. So I said, well, what's up with the addition? They was like, oh, the addition's really horrible, you know, And I already knew that. I said, okay, great. Can you tell me about her multiplication? Because I already knew that answer. They were like, well, her multiplication is actually through the roof. And I said, exactly. Now tell me why. How is it that a girl who can't add 20 plus 30 can multiply it? You can't give me that answer. And until you can't put her in special ed because you don't know what's happening. There you go. You feel me? So we put our kids in homeschooling. Both of them are in college right now. My son just graduated with a degree in business. My daughter is going into her 2nd year this year, and I'm really proud of them. And my youngest is technically 11 years old, but she's going into the 8th grade, right? Awesome. Everybody said homeschooling was whack. Now everybody's doing it. And I think that they're going to find back to love, right? That parental love, that extra care, that extra time, it makes a measurable difference. It makes a measurable difference. It will change.
It makes a measurable distance first because it changes their understanding of what their self-love is. It makes a measurable distance second because we will reform community. So what will happen next is we'll be building our own schools. Yep. And we'll be understanding, because we're all on social media chatting about it, that certain moms made it through the pandemic better than others. Yeah. Certain moms had administrative positions with their jobs that made it almost impossible, right, to keep up with the curriculum of their schools. I'm grateful I'm not one of those moms. I'm grateful I own my own business. I'm grateful that my clients, you know, particularly Newark Symphony Hall, have given me the kind of flexibility in order to be able to plan from home, right? Without having it be a major interruption for my kids. Before the pandemic hit, I was able to take my daughter to meetings there. So it will change work culture. It will change school culture, right? And it will, you know, at least because we're all talking about it on the internet with all this time we have on our hands, not being able to socialize in public, retreating to the ability to socialize virtually, we'll realize that so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so did it so fly that they're now going to join in together, and we might have a new Black school and institution out of this, right?
I think we're about to see a huge shift in Black education, in American education, because so many of the flaws of this educational system are being exposed through this pandemic. It's unbelievable.
Most certainly. It's a good thing. My plan, thankfully, with Generation Hip Hop, and that's the organization that I founded after the work with the UHHM and alongside Ndaba Mandela, right, Nelson Mandela's grandson, was this retire plan, right, that included a new HBCU, right? So a minority serving institution. And I'm so glad that we had about, a good 3 years of hard grinding, pre-planning work already completed prior to this pandemic hitting and everyone having the kind of time flexibility to build curriculums for their kids. And my oldest is going off to college this year. So at the same time that I'm monitoring his school choice and helping him do these 10 or so applications to these diverse institutions, going to the career fairs where you're collecting all the brochures and looking through them together, right, across these 2 generations, I'm planning a school with an organization that's now present in 65 plus countries, and so it's just kind of like and with full intentions on having that institution be right in the backyard here in Trenton, right? So also engaging local community stakeholders that give a hot damn because it means it's in their city, right? And putting tax money back into our community. And so it's like, we need to build new schools. We need to change workforce culture. This pandemic, for better or for worse, is focusing and honing in on what first we have to get through this recession, right? But what joblessness is going to mean in order to create new institutions and to unite people into new networks in order to create these institutions. And I hate that sometimes it gets framed as this isn't hip hop, right?
Right.
But if you look all across examples of women in hip hop and this fight and this quest for Black heterosexual normativity, that isn't abusive, that isn't traumatic, that builds up Black families, that supports Black children, that reclaims space from, the streets, right, into more holistic presentations of what we need in order to be happy, healthy as a community, right? Then even if it didn't explicitly state, let's build a new school in the middle of a pandemic, right? It was talking about re-educating our minds, you know what I mean? And it was talking about kind of figuring out what is, overextended Black trauma in our relationships so that we have positive collaboration across that same dialectic that Africa Bambaataa was getting at, right? What happens when Black men and Black women sit together at a table? What can we produce from that? And I think Bambaataa most certainly knew, right? Even in the wake of all that scandal that I directly confronted with my elder Paradise Gray, right?
Shout out to Paradise, the OG. That's my boy right there.
Shout out to Paradise, literally, right? But even in the wake of that, I still think that Bambaataa meant something much larger than what are you going to do for this hour radio show? If the two of you, right, are pioneers in the creation of hip hop's first museum, right, at least at that level and at least inside of the Bronx, then what are you going to do in order to archive our history in ways that don't overlook the presentation of Black women, in ways that have healthy networks for collaborative business relationships, which is something that Maulana Karenga was trying to get us to do, Garvey was trying to get us to do, Du Bois was trying to get us to do, right, for over a century at this point, right, in order to make sure that we have, that HBCUs were founded in order to create, right, to make sure that we had some positive networks, relationships being built inside of our community such that our institutions would not falter and they wouldn't be over dependent upon mass mediated industries, because hip hop was the first to see that exploitation at the level of recording industries, right? At the level of entertainment networks, right? As digital culture and prison culture and hip hop culture rose together.
So in this situation that we find ourselves in collectively as human beings, what are some of the initial steps that we can take to love ourselves and one another better?
Honor it as a cycle, all love, structural solutions. Know that you're going to take 10 steps back and you're going to take 10 steps forward, but it's okay, because Black people are the original people and we're the architects of this, shout out to Paradise, we're the architects of this culture and this civilization. So even if we end up back at square one, Square one was ancient Kemet.
Right.
Homies.
Right. Right.
So
Right.
we good. You know
Right.
what I mean? But know that you're going to have to go through it as a cycle. I think that the most misleading thing about Black migration, and this is why hip hop is always representing their hoods in the first place, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's because we were stolen from Africa. We were deposited here. We were like, nah, we heard there's some cities up north.
Yeah. We out.
There's some cities out west, right? If you were in Louisiana and Texas, right? And we want to go migrate.
Right.
And that's why we're always representing our hoods. But the point is, even as we branch out and as we reach out, as long as we take enough time to go and heal and return to our homes and deal with the trauma that is also us, right? Both inflicted from the outside by white supremacy and internalized in the inside in Black interracial violence.
Right.
Then we can heal. We can take the steps back that are needed in order to take the steps forward. And if we honor our greatness, which is what, you know, Latifah, what Bahama did, what Jean Grey, right?
Jean Grey. Yes.
Thus far, right? I love that song, Don't Rush Me. It's like, I want to become a mom too. I'm creeping up on 30. All of my friends are starting to have babies, but I got some extra work to do with me before I can bring another life in. Yeah. So understand it's going to be a cycle, but we're going to return right back to that presentation of greatness that is innate inside of us, right? And that as long as we're willing to put in the real messy work of having that same self-love, self-healing, get redirected back into our community, that's the hard part, right? That's where I was going with Black migration. The messiest thing about that modernist movement for Black culture is that it gave us a false sense of upward mobility for our community. Now, upward mobility only works for self. Right. And if you're doing it by yourself, at the very best, you might get a generation or two after you that have been pulled up by their bootstraps. But if you're not doing it along with the rest of your community, guess what? Your planned Levitt community, and anyone who's on my side of the world will get this, your post-World War II suburb will look like somebody's hood if only you're upwardly mobile with your family. Yeah. Okay, you got your house. Congratulations. You have your deed and your granddaddy still lives there. But next door to you, they renting on Section 8 because they can now. Because the hoods got overpopulated, gentrified, and said, we're going to send all the people from Camden to Willingboro anyway. Aha. Right?
It's deep,
so
man.
As long as you're willing to do that cycle with more than just yourself, but you're willing to do that cycle with your community also, all love. Right.
Now,
you're willing to say, I'm going to pull up other people and heal with other people while I'm healing. And your whole community does a 360. And that's a beautiful thing.
Now, what is the role of things like the following? Meditation, the Christian church, the masjid, the synagogue, what is like going to therapy, individual or group? What role does that play in our need to love ourselves better and love one another better? Like, are we abandoning those kinds of traditions, or are we building new ones? What's happening?
We're not abandoning them. Because I love that question as an urban planner, because we're redesigning cities, overlooking them, and we're putting way too much emphasis in the city into affordable housing and places to live with no jobs, and overlooking what the pastor has to say about what the block should look like. Right. So no, I don't think developers are constantly imagining them, but the folk, right, are using them as their houses. That's the beautiful thing about community, right? You got your house, you got your place of worship, you have your recreation center, you have your park, that you
Right.
utilize, if it's for meditation, if it's for jujitsu, if
Right.
it's, you know what I mean, like whatever it's for you personally, if it's just for long walks and
Right.
prayer, you know what I mean, whatever it's for you, you're using these spaces and you're dipping into these different houses throughout the day. And most importantly, you're sending or taking with your family, right, to these different houses and to these different spaces. So they have enormous value. I think what we're beginning to see is that it doesn't have to be as monolithic as it was in the past, right? There was a time before migration, most certainly, where the Christian faith was the anchor for the Black community, right? And that's despite the fact that Muslim slaves were brought here too, right? My now deceased ancestor, Hatim Bilal, when we went to Edenton, North Carolina, which is where the Gilliams were slaves, right? And we sat on that water in the Albemarle Sound. He was like, America Amir. That's a Muslim name.
Wow.
Your great-great-grandmother who used to live here, Dini, that's a Muslim name. Like, there were Muslim slaves brought here. So, you know, that's despite the fact that we were at least overlooking Islam in the presentation of what our anchor should be. And then, by the time we did migrate, and I just kind of told you that story in the warm-up, my family history, we were like, oh, Hebrew Israelites, I can rock with that for a little while. And Nation of Islam, most certainly. Those are some stand-up, you know, proud, determined Black men to take back our streets, even if that's not your faith, and it's not my faith. I put my son, I homeschooled my daughter for the whole year, and I put my son in an NOI school because when he was 12 and he lost his dad, I said, you're going to need, this is the critical time for you to have an accessible Black male role model in your faith. So I'm going to give you at least 4 or 5 in this, you know, Muhammad University of Islam school in Newark, and let them help me, right?
And help
as
him.
a mom in order to teach you manhood. Exactly. And help him most importantly, right? But like, I knew that I was missing something, that my house couldn't offer him everything, right?
Man, that's so deep, right?
School day in another house.
No, I think it's so deep, man. And, you know, these are the things that we, you know, I'm someone who meditates almost daily. You know, I pray daily. I believe in the power of prayer. I believe in the power of meditation. I believe in homeschooling. I believe in, you know, children sitting with books on topics that they love as well as those they need. Right. You know what I mean? I'm really glad you came on today. How can people get a hold of you?
Thank you. So the easiest way is on Instagram. My Instagram handle is my company name, Oil House, but it's actually separated with the underscore. So it's at oil_house_. That's the easiest way. And right at the top of that page, I have a link tree to some of my highlights. And then I have the email there as well, and I do DMs because I haven't blown up by any means, and I can still manage them. And so that's the easiest way. If you're looking for my work on the ground these days, check out the Project Symphony Works that is coming to Newark. It grew out of the client that Oil House has, Newark Symphony Hall, and the dynamic vision of their CEO, Tanisha Nash Laird, and the progressive Black government that they had in place with Mayor Baraka. In order to kind of revitalize a historic Black arts institution, but then also do some good work in, you know, assisting and reinforcing supports for Black developers in the city of Newark, native Newark developers, no matter what their ethnicity is, really, and, you know, kind of changing the fabric of what downtown Newark would otherwise look like without their presence. Well,
thank you, man. Thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you for sharing all of your wisdom, because it's really important, right? I mean, we're in such a transitional time, right? And we need to be reevaluating everything about ourselves and the people around us, as well as the environment, obviously. And, you know, I think you shared a lot of wisdom that we need to hold on to.
Thank you.
You know, thank you. Obviously, anytime you come
so
out to the
much,
West Coast
Lisa.
is good for you out here. You know what I'm saying? And
My blessings to your whole family. My blessings to your whole
thank
left
you.
coast as you're
Yeah,
dealing
yeah.
now with coastal fires and, you know, your own
Bonkers.
kind of urban scape and
Yeah.
suburban scape is changing and literally under fire right now. My every prayer is that y'all make it out of this in the way that Mother Earth intended.
Yeah.
And that you get some rain. I'm a big Yemaya channeler, that you get some rain in order to quell all this fire.
Yeah. Please. So, you know, thank you again for being on Bishop Chronicles. Y'all go follow her page and enjoy her wisdom in many other ways like you just did. So stay strong. You know what I'm saying? It's Bishop Chronicles. Holla at a scholar. You know how we do.